Lieutenant Silas, thank you for leading us in worship this morning. And if you're just joining us, I want to welcome you again to our service this morning with Village Church Chicago. My name is Matt, and I'm one of the pastors here on staff along with Luke. And we just want to wish you again a happy Mother's Day. Whether you are a mother or, we'd already mentioned throughout the service, if you are any woman, we want to wish you a happy Mother's Day since we appreciate the way you are showing love to others as well. But right now we're in this series that we are calling By Faith. And in the series, we are exploring what it means to live by faith. We're looking at examples of different people in the Old Testament that the author of Hebrews in Hebrews chapter 11 and 12 are showing to us as examples of people who lived by faith. People who lived by faith despite the odds, despite the consequences. They chose to trust and follow and obey God. And so in week one, we looked at what faith is. And we saw that faith is choosing to obey God even despite what the consequences or what the outcomes are. Faith is choosing to obey God even when we're not sure of how things are going to turn out. And then week two, we saw that faith is, this was last week with Luke, Luke showed us that faith is choosing to trust God. The reason we can trust God is because we know His character. And when we know what His character is, who this God is, we are able to follow Him, even in spite of the consequences or in spite of what it looks like for our unique life. But today, how we want to take a unique angle on continuing this By Faith series is we want to ask, what does it look like to live by faith when life doesn't go according to plan? And I think this is something that we all can too intimately identify with right now. Because for all of us right now, we've all have had so many things in our lives not go according to plan during this pandemic. I think all of us, that have been true already, that all of us have had different things in life that have happened that haven't gone according to our plan or according to the desires we have for our life. But right now, we are just all intimately tied together to this moment where life isn't going according to plan. And that's affecting people differently. For some people, it's meant a change of their summer plans, a change of their work plans. For other people, it's meant maybe that they had been looking forward to promotions that because of the current economic climate aren't going to happen. Or for many people, and I know unemployment right now is at a record high. And so for far too many people in our church community and in the wider community, they have been laid off from their jobs, which just a few months before was nothing that anyone would have dreamed would have been a part of their plan. Or for students right now, especially the graduating seniors, I really feel for them. They're not having the graduation ceremonies, the celebrations that they expected. That was not according to their plan. Or to those who maybe are going to college for the first time this next fall, the last thing they would have expected was that it's uncertain whether they're even be able to live in the dorms or not, whether they're going to be doing their school completely online. All of us right now are living in this moment where life is not going according to plan. And one of the really important questions that we really ought to be asking ourselves right now is, what does it look like to respond well? What does it look like for us to respond well when life isn't going according to plan? What does it look like to live well in this moment? Because if we're not intentional about choosing how we're going to be responding to this moment where life isn't going according to our plan, our default is not to respond well. Let me just kind of throw out a few different ways that our default response might be that is not our best choice. And I think one common default response is that when life doesn't go according to plan, we make impatient, rash decisions. Think about some of the worst decisions you've made in your life. I'd be willing to bet that those decisions came when you felt really impatient, you felt like life hadn't gone the way you wanted, and so you're just going to force your will upon that. You're going to maybe you're going to kind of skirt the normal process. You're going to take a shortcut, or you're just going to let your rage out, even at the wrong person, even if they had nothing to do with the situation. And because we feel impatient, we we oftentimes in those moments are our greatest moments of disobedience. Because we feel impatient, we want to just make it happen so bad that we don't care who is in our way or who is negatively affected. So one of the ways that we respond poorly is just we make poor, rash decisions. But another way is that we can feel anxious. Think about it. I think the biggest challenge of this whole pandemic for all of us is we don't fully know when it's going to be over. We don't fully know how it's going to turn out. And so in those moments, we can take these massive deep dives of reading article after article on the newspaper or however you find your online information, or we can just sit there ruminating and thinking about when will this end? When will it be done? And yet the more we try to research in order, really what we're doing is we're trying to find and take back control. But the more we think about how much control we don't have, and the more we try to find control, we actually feel more and more out of control. And our anxiety only grows. One last reason one last way that we can respond poorly is we can just waste the time right now. We can kind of say, I'm not going to really live my life until this event is over, or I'm not going to live my life until I have what I want. Maybe that's marriage for someone, maybe that's children for another, maybe it's a job for another person, but we can all essentially say, maybe it's finishing college for another person, but we can all say, my life isn't really going to start until I get this thing. But what happens then if that's not in the cards for our life? What happens if we never have that plan happen? We can spend so much of our life going after this thing that in the end might not ever even happen, and then what? And then when we look back at our life, we have to, also live with that regret that we've spent so much of our life not even living to the fullest, that now we're both frustrated with our past and we're frustrated with our present and future. And so what I really want to challenge all of us today to think about is how do we respond well when life doesn't go according to plan? Because I think the stakes are really high. If we don't respond well, we can really waste not only our past, but we can waste our future. And that matters. And so today what I want to talk about is how do we live not only well, but how do we live by faith when life doesn't go according to our plan? And we're going to start off by looking at the story of Abraham and Sarah, because they were people, a couple who were far too intimately aware of life not going according to their plan. And so I'm going to have Luke play the Streetlights Bible version of chapter 11 of Hebrews, and I'm playing this right now because not only do they do a far better job reading the passage than I ever could do, but I hope that when you hear this, you feel a certain inspiration, and just know that you can find this on YouTube, you can find it online, and I really do hope that sometime during this series, everyone at Village or everyone listening would listen to the entirety of chapter 11 of Hebrews through Streetlights Bible, because it is just a beautiful reminder of God's faithfulness throughout history. So Luke, let's play that whenever you're ready.
Hebrews 11. Great examples of faith. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith. For he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child. Though she was barren and was too old, she believed that God would keep his promise. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead. A nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there is no way to count them. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
So did you see how Abraham's life did not go according to his plan? Abraham was living in Haran, in a place he had spent many years with his family. He had people around him that loved him, people that he could celebrate holidays with. But then God asked him to just upend and pick up his life and move to some far off distant land. And for what? Like, he's going to move to this far distant land where he's going to be a foreigner, where he's not going to have any family, any friends, and what is he supposed to tell everyone back at home? Oh, I'm going to leave you because I'm going to this land where I'm not even sure where it is. I'm going to leave all of you behind, all the people who are my social safety net, the people who I love to be around. I'm going to leave all of you so that I can go follow and obey God, but to where? To this undisclosed location? I mean, think about it, like, if you've ever moved before, moving is always challenging, but at least you've moved because you wanted to go to this different place, or because maybe your parents, had a job or some opportunity at this new place. But God was asking Abraham to move from his homeland to a new land where he's going to be a foreigner, where he's going to have to live in tents. And when I read this passage, I just think to myself, how does Abraham do that? Because he obeys. You heard the text. How does he obey? How does he follow God when it seems like he's leaving everything else behind? And as I meditate on this text, like, there's only one conclusion that I can really draw. Abraham had to believe that God's promises were better than his plans. I mean, think about that for a second. Like, how on earth could he leave everything he knew behind, like his family, his connections, the place where he had status? How could he leave all that behind for just the unknown? Like, as human beings, like, we fear nothing more than the unknown. How could he leave all that behind for the unknown unless he believed that God's promises were better than his plans? And right now, like, we're finding ourselves in this moment where, again, like, life is not going according to any of our plans. And like Abraham, Abraham, his life didn't go according to plan because he was following and obeying God. But for us, like, we're at this moment where still life is not going according to our plan. And yet, as Abraham, as he was able to obey because he trusted that God's promises were better than our plans, I think that's still something that we can take great comfort and great solace in today. Is that when we believe that God's promises are better than our plans, that we too can find that comfort. We too can find that comfort that can really take us to any place or bring us through any situation when we trust and truly believe that God's promises are better than our plans. Now, Sarah, like Abraham, was also a person who was all too intimately acquainted with life not going according to plan. Except for Sarah, life hadn't not gone according to plan simply when she moved to some new undisclosed land. For her, life had not been going according to plan far before that. For her, life had gone not according to plan for years and years before. And maybe for you, that's kind of where you find yourself. Like, where this pandemic, sure, it's thrown a monkey wrench into your plans. But if you're honest with yourself, life, it wasn't really going according to plan before that either. Maybe for you, you had never really found the career that you wanted. You have seen people who had found so much joy in their career, and yet, like, you felt like you never found that career, or you never been able to land the job you wanted. Or maybe for you, actually, you did get the job you wanted, and yet it wasn't what you thought it would turn out to be. It didn't provide the meaning that you thought it would give you. Like you have all the things you want. You found the job you wanted. You really have everything you want in life, and yet still, it's not turned out to what you thought it would be. Or maybe you're at this point in your life where you thought for sure by now you'd be married. Or maybe, like, you're at this point in your life where you thought by now for sure you'd have children. And if that's where you are, then I want you to know that you're going to find Sarah as really a kindred spirit this morning. Because Sarah, Mother's Day would have been a very hard day for her. Because Sarah, while she became married, she wanted to be pregnant, she wanted to have children. And yet each day on Mother's Day, she would see that more and more of her friends were having children. And she would see later that those same mothers would later become grandmothers, and they'd see all these grandkids running around and interacting with their mothers and grandmothers, and yet Sarah would still not be a mother yet. And so Sarah all too well knows that the pain of infertility, the pain of not being able to have children, and just the pain of that longing of wanting that to be a part of her life. And yet, when we look at the story of Sarah, we do see that God had more for her. Sarah, when she's moving, she's 65 years old and really well beyond the point of any woman could conceive a child. And yet, God, promised her something unique. He promises her that one day she will have a child. And yet for Sarah, the challenge really begins that, I'm sure she went home that night to Abraham, and they probably were really excited when they heard this promise that through her an entire nation would come. And they probably were so excited to have a child at last. And yet, after they went home that night, and the next morning they woke up with this anticipation that maybe something would be new, something would be different. As the days turned into weeks and turned into months, the realization would have hit really fast that she still hadn't become pregnant. And it wasn't like Sarah got pregnant in a year or 2 years or even a decade. It took 25 years for Sarah to finally have that baby. And so I think when we think about our own lives, fast forward 2 years from now. Imagine it's 2 years later from this moment that we are finding ourselves in, and life still isn't going according to your plan. You've been living by faith throughout these last 2 years, and yet when you look at your life, from an outside observer's perspective, it doesn't look any better. Maybe during this time you lost your job, and maybe you've been able to find work after, but you had a full-time job before, but now you're just kind of barely making ends meet, and you are just working a number of part-time jobs. Or maybe you had a spouse or a loved one, and they died during this pandemic, and it's 2 years later, and you're still mourning the loss of their life because this was not how you imagined your future going. Or maybe it's 2 years later, and you still thought that at that point in your life you would maybe have kids, or you yourself would be married, and that still hasn't happened for you. And you wonder in those moments, how are God's promises better than my plans? I want my plans, I don't want God's promises. And so in those moments, I think we have to be asking ourselves the question of, how can we trust God's plans? How can we trust that God's promises are better than our plans? Because when we look at the life of Sarah, what we really saw is that, God's promises, they unfold according to God's plans. And so, with Sarah, we even saw that God's promises were actually so much better than her plans, because, with Sarah, she just wanted a child, and yet she was promised a nation. God was going to bring an entire nation through her, that eventually would also come the Messiah, Jesus would come through her line. And so God's promises were so much better than Sarah's plans. And yet, at the same time, Sarah had to wait 25 years for God's plans to happen. And so in that waiting period, we also have to ask ourselves, how can we possibly wait patiently when this is outside of our control? When God's promises are fulfilled according to God's plans, how do we wait well? How do we wait during that intermediary time? And I think what we see in this passage is something really crucial here, that if we're going to live well during this pandemic, if we're going to live well when life doesn't according to our plans, it's something that we as well will really need for our lives. So check out verse 13 with me as we see really what was underneath Abraham and Sarah's approach as they waited for God's promises to be fulfilled. Verse 13 says, And all these people died, and speaking of Sarah and Abraham, still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it from a distance and welcomed it. And so what the passage is saying is, like, over the course of their lives, like, Sarah and Abraham are only beginning to see God's promises actualized. Like, even with the birth of a son, the birth of Isaac, they're only just beginning to see the beginning of God's promises fulfilled to them. It goes on to say, they agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. And obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they came from, they would have gone back. I think that line is so important there, that if ultimately what they'd been longing for was the fulfillment of their plans rather than God's promises, they would have gone back, or they would have been looking back. And that's so easy for us to get caught in, for us to be frustrated when our plans don't work out, that we just get stuck in the past. No, it's fine to deal with the past, to deal with the disappointment, because that is a reality, that we're going to be disappointed when our plans don't work out, when they go so far south that it truly is painful, just as Sarah's life would have been painful for her and Abraham. And yet, what we see here is that ultimately they're not looking backwards. They're looking forwards. And verse 16 tells us what they're looking forward to. Verse 16 says, "But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them." And so this is so important. This is so critical for us to remember. That the reason why Sarah and Abraham, even as they're waiting for God's promises to be fulfilled, the reason why they're able to look forward rather than back, is because they see that God's promises, they're ultimately pointing to something greater. They are seeing that even when God's promises are fulfilled in their life, that's not the end of it. That's not the end of the story. They're looking forward and seeing that those promises actually point beyond themselves. They point to this greater reality. And that reality is really just this simple idea that one day they are going to be with God. That's what they're ultimately looking forward to, is that what keeps them moving forward and looking forward is that one day they're going to be home with God. One of the promises that Abraham has given is that the land that they're in right now, which is in the promised land, like Abraham is actually in the land of Israel right now, but he doesn't physically possess it. He's living in tents. He's a foreigner there. And 400 years later, when Abraham is living there, or when his descendants live there, they're going to actually possess the land. It will be their homeland. But even then, like Abraham and Sarah, they're not just looking forward to that. They're looking beyond that. They see that the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises is even greater than that. They're seeing that the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise is that one day they will have a heavenly homeland. That one day they will have a home that cannot be taken away by war. One day they will have a home that cannot be shut down by a virus. One day they will have a home that cannot be destroyed by fire or destroyed by the wind or natural disasters. One day they will have a home that is unshakable. And in this home, they will get to dwell with God forever. And that's the same promise that God has given us. That's the same ultimate plan that God has for our lives. That if we trust in Jesus as the person who has died in our place, that we could know God, that one day we too will be able to be with God and be home with God. This is ultimately what all of us have to look forward if we're not going to be looking back. This is what all of us have to be looking forward to if we are able to face well the disappointments of life when life doesn't go according to our plan. Is that one day we will get to be with God, and it will be never taken away from us. We will get to dwell with God in the fullness of His presence forever, without any fear of it being taken away. That's one of the best parts, but also one of the hardest parts about love, Whether you have a friend that you're really close with, maybe a family member you're really close with, or even a spouse or a child that you're really close with, is that we all know this reality that one day that relationship will end, that one day, death will be the end of that relationship, or maybe even conflict will be the end of that relationship. But the beauty of heaven is that in heaven we will never have to fear that the perfect love we experience will ever be taken away from us. We will get to spend each and every day just basking in the presence and the glory of God without any fear that it will be ever taken away. That's what kept Abraham and Sarah looking forward, is that one day they knew that would be their reality. And so they had no reason to ever go back or look backwards again. And so what I hope that you take from that, what I'm taking from that, is this idea that if God's plan is ultimately the best possible plan, then we can trust his plan. I can trust his plan, or you can trust his plan, even when life isn't going according to our plan, when we trust that God's plan is the best possible plan. When you believe, when you trust that God's plan is the best possible plan, then you have this new freedom in your life to be okay. Like, not that there's not going to be disappointment, but to be okay when life doesn't go according to our plans. And so I just want to take a moment here of getting really practical. Like, how do we think about our plans then? Like how do we think about the plans in our life, or like the plans that we make? Like, should we make them? Should we not? Like, how do we think about those plans if ultimately our trust is in God's ultimate plan? Before I was married, I definitely would not be, in any sense of the word, be called a planner. And Laura, on the other hand, like, she's a hardcore planner. She's not someone who has like a 5-year plan. She's someone who operates more off of like a 15 to 20-year plan. And so now finally, after being married to her for 7 years, I think I'm getting to the point finally where I have at least like a 3 to 5-year plan in my life. But really, like how do we think about those plans? And I think, like, when we look at the wisdom of Scripture, like, it's good to make plans. It's good to make plans for your life, to set goals for your life. It's good to have things you want to do and to work after those things and to pursue them. But what I hope that you take from this passage is that our plans are fragile. I hope that, like, one of the things that we're all seeing during this pandemic is that same truth, is that the plans we make, like, we don't have on our own the capacity to actualize those plans. We have some ability to, like, make our plans come true, but, like, in reality, like, we don't have the ability to sustain a single breath. We don't have the ability to orient the future. We don't have the ability to control all of the outside events that are happening around us, like this pandemic, for example. We have some power, but it's very limited. We don't have enough power to fully actualize our plans. Only God does. And so that means that we should really only be placing our hope in God's plans. And when we place our hope in God's plans, like, this beautiful thing happens. When you place your hope in God's plans, you have the freedom to change your own. And maybe we don't necessarily want to change our own, but we have this freedom where we don't have to find our identity. We don't have to find our meaning, our ultimate purpose, or our worth in our plans becoming a reality. We can actually change our plans, and oftentimes, like, we could even find a better reality on the other side of that plan. But we don't have to, no longer be so concerned with our plans happening with that we are just totally demolished and destroyed when they don't become a reality. We don't have to put our hope and our longing into, like, our plans actually becoming a reality, because when we do that, like, we're actually controlled by our plans. Our plans actually become, oppressive to us, because, that they're anxiety inducing, as we're just fearful of whether or not these plans will happen. But when we instead put our hope in God's plan as our ultimate plan, we just have this newfound freedom to pivot or to deviate from our plans. And that is good news for us. That's good news for us on any day, but especially even during this crisis, that you can find meaning when life doesn't go according to your plan right now. Like, you can find meaning during this pandemic or at any stage in your life when life doesn't go according to your plan. We still have a reason for joy every single day of our life, no matter how disappointed we are by the way that life doesn't go according to our plan. Because, some ways that life doesn't go according to our plans are they are going to be really difficult. They are going to be really painful for us. And yet we still have a reason for joy, because we know that God's plan ultimately is the best possible plan. As I end here, I just want to end with a story of a person who is really near and dear to my heart, a person who's really close to me, but a woman who has been all too intimately familiar with life not going according to her plan. But because her hope was ultimately in God's plan, she found the freedom to change her plans. So the one that I'm sharing about today is my Aunt Linda, someone who I love dearly, and I just want to real quick wish you, Aunt Linda, a happy Mother's Day. And Aunt Linda is someone who is all too intimately familiar with having to pivot her plans in life. She never imagined in her life that she wouldn't have children or that she wouldn't be married, but that's not how life unfolded for her. And then, she decided then to follow different dreams. She pivoted and she decided to be a teacher. And so she got both her secondary, so she could teach elementary, middle school, and also her high school accreditation, and she became an English teacher. And she was doing something she loved, and she made sure she got both high school and elementary school accreditation, so that no matter what had happened, she could still find a job in teaching. But shortly after she started teaching, she was a great teacher, beloved by her students. Shortly after she began teaching, she got laid off. The economy was tight at that moment, and they had to do layoffs of all the newer teachers. And so even though she had a backup plan, she still couldn't find a job as a primary or a secondary teacher in teaching elementary school or high school. And so again, she had to pivot her plans. But because her hope wasn't in her plans, since her hope was in God's plans, she found the freedom to change her plan. And I am so thankful that she did, because what she ended up doing is she became a psychologist, and now like how she lives her life is she actually lives her life helping people with anxiety and depression. What she's really doing is she's helping people find meaning and joy in their life when life doesn't go according to their plans. Isn't that so ironic of how all of her life has worked out? That her as someone who's been all too intimately familiar with life not going according to their plans, now helps people when life doesn't go according to their plans. And as I was talking to her yesterday about her life, she said that she really doesn't know many people who are happier than she is. She's actually found great joy and happiness even when life hasn't gone according to her plans. She's found great joy and happiness because her ultimate joy and happiness is in God's plan. And that has just given her so much freedom to experiment in life and try new things and travel and even pursue new careers. And so now she's become an author and she is a psychologist, and she's doing all of these wonderful things, and she just has this incredibly rich life. And so I just want to leave you today with really this good news of hope. That even when life doesn't go according to your plan, if you're willing to live by faith, when life doesn't go according to your plan, if you place your hope in God, you can change your plans, and you can find the security and the beauty and the love of God's ultimate plan for your life, which will make life rich for you both on this earth and after. So now we're going to change here to a time of singing, but before we get to that, we're going to say just a prayer of faith together. And I just want to invite you during this prayer, if you are a person of faith, to just make this your own prayer. And we're calling this our by faith prayer, and we're going to pray this prayer after each sermon during this series, just as a way of reminding ourselves that we are choosing to live by faith, because to live by faith really is a choice. And yet when you live by faith, it has so many benefits, even as we've described today, of the benefit of not having to fear the unknown, that we can have joy when our hope is in God's plan, that we're free to change our plans. And also that, like, if you have never trusted your life to Christ, I would encourage you to really consider, as these prayers are read corporately with our entire church, wherever you're finding yourself, I would really encourage you to make this your own plan, to, for the first time in your life, make Jesus the Lord of your life. Because ultimately, his plan is the best possible plan for your life. And I want you to have that plan and know that peace and joy in your life as well. So if you're ready, we're going to say this prayer together. So please join me. Father, help me to live by faith and not by fear, panic, or short-sightedness. Help me to live by the assurance of your promise and not by the fragility of income and health. And help me to find my ultimate security in you, the one who died to deliver me from death. Amidst the uncertainty of this season, remind me that you are the sole source of certainty. Teach me, Father, to live by faith and help me to draw near to you.